All right, so just want to give you guys another lecture on logic, specifically the premise assignments. First of all, I want to say that I'm really pleased. Things are going really well. Um, a lot of you guys are making progress, doing well. And in the case of other folks who need to work on some things, I have a lot of reason to hope that the fixes are going to be pretty easy just because of how well you guys are doing. At the very top of this document that I'm using, I have the three things that I'm hoping to go over in this lecture. First of all, just a reminder um, about the basic thing that we're doing. And then secondly, um, uh, um, just an observation about what some of you all are doing, perhaps as a strategy, perhaps not, and that's why I want to address it. And then what we'll be focusing most of our time on, which is the argument that you're making in response to the argument that I give you as a prompt. So let's start with the first of these. Um, One thing to keep in mind is that when you're trying to break down arguments into logical form, which all of you are doing, and that's awesome, you want to make sure that you're not just breaking it down in your head in a way that makes sense to you, which could be totally right, by the way. But for this assignment, it's something specific that's kind of being tested for, and that is your whether or not you've learned certain logical rules that are sort of universally taught in critical thinking and logic courses. So that's what some of what this assignment is doing. And what that means is that even if you might have broken it down correctly even or incorrectly, either way, it doesn't matter in your own head, you also need to make sure that what you have in mind fits a logical form. And we have four logical forms. You can go back to the first lecture that I posted this semester to see those logical forms. They are modus ponens, modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism, and disjunctive syllogism. And if you're thinking, well, I think I understand it this way, the way I've broken it down, but I can't really see how to put it into one of those four forms, that's okay. That's where you're at, and you can definitely tell me that. You can ask for help for sure. But what you want to try your best to do when you're turning something in for these assignments is make sure that it fits one of those forms. Even if you're thinking, yeah, but that's not the way I understood it, or once I do that, it looks wrong. Even still, so long as it fits one of those logical forms, that's what you need to do to be getting a pretty good grade already in these assignments. And if you don't do that, if you don't fit the logical form, that's when some kind of harder grades start coming your way. Feel free to email me about that if that's not clear or if you're worried whether you did that or not. Most of you did not do that. So that's just a comment at the beginning for a few people who I hope that will be helpful for. And if not, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just email me and we'll go from there. Let's move on to the second point. I got maybe, I'm not sure of the exact number, but let's say maybe 5 of you um, represented the argument that you were given as a prompt. You put it into logical form. That's awesome. It was correct. So if you said it was modus ponens, it really was modus ponens. If you said it was modus tollens, it really was modus tollens. And it represented the author correctly. You're giving a good representation of what the author is arguing. You did all of that great. And then you left it there. Now, one strategy, if you are not sure how to come up with arguments yourself, it's a respectable strategy just to say, you know what, this is all that I'm going to do of this assignment. I'm going to take the hit in the grade, but at least I know I'm doing this right. And that's cool. Like, I want to inspire you and help you to reach further, and that's what I'm going to try to do in this lecture. But I get that. If you're doing that on purpose, then that is your choice as a student. But maybe some of you did that and you thought you were doing everything you were supposed to be doing for the assignment. And for those students especially, I want to say, if you want to do more, if you want to do everything that it takes to get a good grade on these premise assignments, then you want to represent the author correctly using right logical form, but then you want to move on and do something more than that. And that's what we're going to do in this next step, setting yourself up for success in making your own argument. And I hope to show you how to do that. Now, what I've done is I've looked around for a place that gives an argument for something that you aren't necessarily going to encounter in this class. And I was just kind of looking around and I found, you may or may not know this philosopher's name. Agnes Callard has some fame beyond philosophy world, and she has an essay provocatively entitled The Case Against Travel. And at the end of the day, really what this is her argument against tourism of a certain sort. And, that's the way philosophers are. They argue for things that oftentimes upset people. And in that link, if you go there, you'll find her essay at the beginning, and then you'll find a few people who wrote essays in response to hers. And this next quote here comes from someone who responded to Agnes Callard's essay. His name is Ross Douthat. And the way that he represents Agnes Callard's argument, he could be wrong about this. I read through her essay again, and I wasn't sure if I thought he was right about this way of summarizing her argument, but nevertheless, it's kind of succinct and helpful because it's short and succinct. And so this is what Ross Douthat says. Tourism, right? So tourism's core failure, according to Agnes Callard, in the way that Ross Douthat sees her argument, is that it promises, it being tourism promises growth or conversion, but generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began. Okay, now, whether you know it or not, this one sentence is an argument. And I'm going to break that down. So here's the idea. Agnes Callard is against tourism. So if you know that that's her conclusion, you can write out, therefore, tourism. Let's see if I'm going to spell this right. My goodness, this is going to be embarrassing. Tourism is bad or not great. We'll make it less harsh in that way. Okay, so that's where she ends up. How does she get there? And oftentimes, not always, modus ponens is going to be your go-to rule. It doesn't have to be that way at all. But I'm going to use it in this case. And here's the idea. If tourism promises growth and conversion, but if it generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began, then that's the A. If A, then what? Well, the thing that you want to follow from it, the B, is this right here. the conclusion. So you just copy and paste that, right? So if A, then copy and paste the B, put it in, tourism is not great, and then you want to write out the A. If A, then B, A, therefore B for modus ponens. So let's copy and paste the A, put it in, a few little cleaning things up with editing, tourism promises growth and conversion, but we want to take out the if, but it generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began. And now we can put in our numbers. It's good if you can to keep up the numbering. Don't start 1, 2, 3, and then for the next argument, 1, 2, 3. Instead, do 1, 2, 3 for the first argument, and then for the second argument, do 4, 5, 6, or wherever you're at in the numbers. If you have an argument that lasted 9 premises and conclusions, then your argument, your next argument is going to start off with 10, 11, 12. That's better to do. I'm not going to count you off if you don't, but it's helpful when I'm responding to you so that I can refer to number 2 or number 1, but if there's 2 number 2s or 2 number 1s, it's a little confusing. All right, so that's the argument of Agnes Callard according to Douthit. And now this is key. This is what this whole thing right here, this is what we're doing. We're trying to set ourselves up for success in making our own arguments. And I'm going to give you an argument in favor of this and an argument against it if I can think of it on the spot, because I haven't thought about this in advance. So we'll see. Maybe there'll be some dead silence as I talk about it here with you all. That could, at the very least, I think best case scenario there is at least you can think it's funny. All right, so best thing to do, again, it's helpful for me if you write out my argument so I know for sure that you're making that transition and that I don't wonder whether this, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is all supposed to be Agnes Callard, her argument, or if part of it is hers and part of it is yours. Just put a definite little title here right in the middle so I know when you are giving your argument and you are no longer representing her argument on the assumption that Douthit is getting her correct. All right? So here's the thing. When you think to yourself, here's the step-by-step. When you sometimes you're just going to know that you agree with an argument, or you're going to know for sure that you disagree with an argument. That's awesome. Even still, it doesn't even matter really if you really, really disagree or you really, really agree, or you're just totally not sure what to think about this argument. It doesn't really matter because you know that the thing that you need to do is attack or defend a premise. And 1 and 2 are our premises. 3 is not a premise because it's a conclusion. You can't argue for or against conclusions. And you can only argue for or against premises. So what I want to do when I'm arguing for something and what I want to do when I'm arguing against something is I want to think to myself, which of these 2 premises is least plausible? Why? Because if I agree with this argument, I want to help out the premise that is least plausible. And if I disagree with this argument, then the easiest place to show that the argument is wrong is the premise that is least plausible. All right, so now I'm just going to think about it here to myself and try to figure out which of these 2 premises I personally think is least plausible. Does tourism really promise growth and conversion? And is it also true that it generally returns the travelers unchanged to where it began? I mean, there's a lot there that you could question. So that's a good one. What if it's true that tourism really does promise growth and conversion, but it's also true that usually it returns people unchanged to where they began? Does that mean that tourism is not great. Both of these two can be challenged. I'm going to go ahead and choose premise 2. You could disagree. Maybe you think premise 1 is least plausible, but I'm going to say that premise 2 is least plausible. And now I'm going to come up with an argument in favor of number 2. All right. Tourism promises growth and conversion. So I think I'm only going to support the idea that tourism promises growth and conversion. You could also try to support this other claim here, but you don't have to in order to support the premise as a whole, because if you're taking one part of a premise and supporting it, that's pretty good. You don't have to do it all. So I'm going to say something like this. The way that tourism, the way that all the many aspects and businesses of tourism make their money is that they want people to think they are going to get a really great experience out of traveling or whatever in the way that they are thinking about doing. And if that's true, if 4 is true, then it looks like tourism really does promise growth and conversion, and you can copy and paste the whole thing. That's probably the best thing to do, even though I'm only supporting one part of the premise. All right, and then 6, the conclusion, we have just copy and paste. Remember, that's your friend. Copy and pasting is your friend because you want your A's and your B's and your C's if you have them, and D's and E's and F's, all that stuff, all of them to line up. And so this fits the form of modus ponens. Let's just check that out. Notice how 4, all of that right there that I've selected is A. And then notice how A shows up again in premise 5, really just simply referred to as premise 4. And then everything after the then is the B, and that shows up exactly in 6. That fits the form exactly of modus ponens 4 and 5. So notice some of the things that I did here. I thought, what's least plausible? I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go after number 2. In this case, I was going in favor of number 2. One thing that I didn't do, but I probably should have done, is I probably should have said, well, if I'm going in favor of number 2, I'm gonna copy and paste it, which I just did, just to kind of do it for you here in front of you. I put it down there and I say, well, that's going to be my conclusion right there. So I'm just going to write that out, and then I know, well, that's where I need to end up with. If I know that I'm arguing in favor of it, and I know that that's B, and if I want to use modus ponens, then what I can say is, aha, well, if I'm going to use modus ponens, then B right there in letter form is also B here at the end. So then I can just take all of that, which I just copied and pasted. I can come up here, delete my B and replace it with all of the words that I need. And now the only thing I need to think about is, okay, if I really do believe that tourism promotes growth and conversion, if that's something I really believe, why do I believe that? Now, I gave my own reason. Some of that is missing from your screen, but here it is again. This is my reason. This is what I came up with, but maybe you have a different reason. And whatever it is, just imagine yourself talking to a friend, and if they asked you, why in the world do you believe that tourism promotes growth and conversion? Why do you think that's true? And you kind of sit there and you think about it for a while. Why do I believe that's true? And whatever would come out of your mouth at that point, talking to a good friend at a coffee shop or in your dorm room, that's what you write out. It doesn't need to be super fancy. It's just, what would I say? Just imagine yourself, maybe type it out, maybe talk it out loud. what would you say to someone? Or just actually have a conversation with a friend. If they're willing to talk with you for a little bit and you think, why do I believe this? And you kind of talk it out with them and see what you come up with. Anything that you come up with, type it out, and that's going to be your A, right? So then if I'm at this point, I'm just copying what I already wrote, but this helps you break it down a little bit, the process a little more. If that's your A, if that's your reason to think that premise 2 is correct, am I doing that correct? Yes, okay, good. Then you just plop that in there. That's your reason right there. Take out some of the, kind of edit it up a little bit, and now you got it, and you got to do it again for the next premise. Put it down in there, and now you just number it out, which we already have. So I will go ahead and number it out, but this is just a repetition of kind of more or less what we have. I've switched out the if then. The if then in my first way of doing it was 5. It was the second step of the argument. I've just switched it, and now it's 7. It's the first step of the argument. But it's the same thing. So you number it out, and you cite your numbers, and you're good to go. All right, so I'm going to leave it the way it was to begin with. Let me write out those things so that you have it in the paper version of this lecture, which is think to yourself what premise is least plausible. If you agree with the argument, copy and paste that premise and put therefore in front of it. Then usually, but I will say not always, you'll use modus ponens. The A of modus ponens is your reason for thinking that the least plausible premise is true. And once you come up with your reason, then you just whatever you want to call it, plug things into the variables. Make sure your A's and B's line up. Use copy and paste. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to imagine that we are going to argue against premise 2. So what I just went through is what you do if you agree with the least plausible premise. Again, you don't have to do the least plausible. It's just the easiest thing to do. If you're really interested in helping an argument out, you want to help it out where it's weakest, but you don't have to. You can help it out where it's strongest. Sometimes if the premise is really, really strong and you want to help it out there, there's nothing more to say because it's so obvious, like no one's going to disagree with it. You know, that's not always true, but it's sometimes true. So that's why you just need to watch out for it. And if you're arguing against an argument, yeah, you can take it on where it's strongest, and maybe at its strongest, it's still pretty weak. But sometimes at its strongest, it's really, really strong, and it's going to be hard to do that. So it's just a point of advice for you. It's not what you have to do every time. I'm definitely not at all 0% grading you on that. It's more my advice to you for how to make this easier. Okay, so premise 2, according to me, is the weakest premise. It's the least plausible premise. And now let's think what we would do to argue against premise 2. Tourism promises growth and conversion, but it generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began. And, is that right? I'm going to argue against that second part. I mean, it would be fun to argue against the very thing that I just argued in favor of, but it's just easier. I think this part is easier to push back against. So I'm going to do that. Um, and okay, so I'm going to think how to do that real quick. And what I want to do is I'm just going to actually, this time I'm going to show you how to do it by, I'm going to copy and paste the part that I'm against. So I just did that. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to paste that down, and I'm going to say, since I'm against this, notice, I'm against the idea right here selected, so I can't leave it like that because this has me arguing in favor of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write, therefore, it is not the case that in front of the thing that I disagree with, and now I have myself at an endpoint where I want to be. And I'm going to add a few extra steps just to show you what you can do. If it is not the case that it generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began, then 2 is false. Therefore, 2 is false. And that's going to be MP, but I don't know the numbers yet. So let's just leave that till later. What I really, though, need to do is come up with my reasoning for it. It is not the case that it generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began. That is, tourism generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began. And so what I'm going to say is that something like this. So again, but before I do it, before I write it out, because I'm just jumping ahead, if I believe that it's false, that tourism generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began, you want to ask yourself, why do I believe that? And you just come up with a reason. And so my reason, without typing it out, is, I've been on a few expeditions here and there, gone on to see some mountains or an ocean or a cool building or whatever, right? I've done that a few times, maybe many times in my life. And maybe it hasn't totally transformed me, so I'm a completely new person, but it certainly has changed me. I know what a different culture is like. I've been around other cultures. I've seen some things about history, whatever it might be. Maybe I connected with something in nature. There's all sorts of things that can happen on these trips. And more than that, I know people who, they didn't go to a different culture to live there for years and years, but they went there for a week and they came back and they did have a different perspective on the world. So they were not exactly the same people as they were before, and something really truly significant did happen on that trip. Now, what I did is I just spoke out loud all the stuff I would say to someone in a conversation if I was with them, hanging out with my friends, but I haven't typed it out yet. And so that might take a little work. You just said it all, and you're like, wait, what did I just say? So you got to start typing it out. All right, so I'm going to try to type it out now. In my experience, my travels have maybe not completely changed me, but they have given me new perspectives on different cultures or nature, and I know the same is true for a lot of my friends. All right, so that's a premise. And what I would then say is if, and I'm going to copy and paste this. Copy, paste. If, in my experience, my travels have maybe not completely changed me, but they have given me new perspectives on different cultures and nature, and I know the same is true for a lot of my friends, then now copy and paste this part down here. This is modus ponens again. It is not the case that tourism generally returns travelers unchanged to where they began. All right, now I need my numbers, and I'm going to keep going from where I was before. Just remember, keep up the numbering the whole time. So the last premise that I used, even though you don't have to turn in an argument where you agree and an argument where you disagree, I'm just always keep up the numbering no matter what. So the last one was 6, so I'm going to start off with 7. That's a premise, that's a premise, and then this is a conclusion. So if you were going to argue for or against this new thing, you couldn't do 9, even though that's not a part of the assignment. New premise 10, and then another conclusion right away, and we will show why that's the case in a little bit. But first, notice ponens 7 and 8. Let me get this all on the screen for you if I can, so that you can see that everything in 7 is your letter A, and then the part in between the if and the then is the letter A again. Everything after the then is the B. In this case, B is a negation. It has the word not in it, but B, the letter B, stands for a statement which is a negation. And so then you have the letter B showing up again for modus ponens. And then you have a new iteration of modus ponens where number 9 now, we're switching things out. It's a little confusing, but I think you'll get it. Number 9 is for this rule right here. We're saying this follows from modus ponens. Well, then how is that true? That is true because this number 9 is the new A. And then we have if A, that's the A again, then B, that's the new B, which you have here repeated again, copied and pasted. For that rule, you want to put in your premise numbers, and there you go. So let's look at some takeaways for when you disagree with a premise. It's the same thing. Look out for the least plausible premise. Find it, copy and paste it, write. Therefore, it is not the case that in front of it, because you're disagreeing with the premise, because you disagree with the argument as a whole. And then once you have that, you want to think, well, what's my reason? What's my reason for disagreeing with it? Write it out. Write out your reason once you figure it out. And that reason is identical to A in MP. Modus ponens. Again, you don't have to do it that way. You can use modus tollens, hypothetical syllogism. A lot of you guys are using hypothetical syllogism really awesome ways, so don't worry about that. That's awesome that you're expanding, that you're using all the rules. That's really cool. Had a few people use modus tollens. That's awesome. Keep it up. Just trying to give you a template to help you out. That's it. And then, yeah, so if you know your reason, you know that it's A, then you just fill in the variables. You know that B is this. It is, therefore, it is not the case that, and then whatever it is that you put there, the copied and pasted part. All right, so this lecture in written form will be available to you online, and hopefully what I've talked out here is helpful. If it is, awesome. If it's not, no problem at all. Just email me. I'll do my very best to help you out. Keep going strong. Things are going good. Don't get discouraged. Remember, Um, Stay in communication with me. Don't get locked in to frustration with how things are going. Keep up the communication. That's a big part of online classes, but for any of the classes that you take in your time in college, stay in communication, um, and yeah, keep going. You're doing great. All right.